I'm Evan Nathaniel Grimm. Welcome to my astrology community. Thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday night. We're going to be tracking March 2023 in a very special way, going beyond even some of the other videos I've done. I'm going to take a really honest look at it today. Going to give you the insights that are not always actually spoken about. So I'm going to give you that really honest take and explore what it means for you, what it means for me, what it means for the collective and everybody. But before that, we are going to also cover this week ahead. Melanie, thank you for joining. So the upcoming week, I'm still going to guide you through that. And then we're going to go all in on March and explore the themes. So let's start off by tracking where we are right now. So right now we have a Gemini moon Sunday night, we're coming off of a Pisces moon that was, again, hopefully, very much for you about setting the vision. Hello, Catherine. It was very much about setting the vision. The Pisces new moon. Pisces is about believing in yourself. Hello, Natasha. Pisces, you believe in yourself. You believe in a possibility outside of yourself. You believe that your imagination can actually lead you to a certain pathway towards, really the realization of a unification with the divine. Pisces is very exalted in a way. So the Pisces new moon, you were drawing up a plan, dreaming about it, and with Saturn slowly reaching towards Pisces, there will be a way for you to stabilize it, those dreams. There will be a way for you to manifest those. But in terms of where we are now, we have a Gemini moon coming up into an applying conjunction with with Mars. The Gemini moon right now is, as always during this Mars transit, a little feisty and very much argumentative. So anytime we have the moon in Gemini, you want to be a little bit careful about how you speak your mind. Certainly be honest and be truthful, but the way you deliver information right now can very easily upset other people. So between Sunday night and especially into Monday night, so Monday night, February 27th, I'm seeing that sort of peak of the, again, agitation, the disruptiveness. So tomorrow, I'm not really liking some of the conversations that are happening. I feel like some of them are going to feel as if someone else is a little bit slow in communicating something to you or vice versa. So there's a lot of impatience the next 24 hours. And you want to sit with that and recognize where you are being impatient. Because Mars Gemini is the most restless Mars placement. And yes, there's even, it's a time for, with Pisces season, it can make us emotional. It can make us feel like, we're out of step a little bit with our logic. And Mars Gemini is just really rushing us forward and saying, we want to get all these thoughts out there. But it's hard to unscramble them when we're so emotional with Pisces. During Pisces season, right? Like I want to say I love you, but I also want to say I hate you, and I also want to say that you're wrong about something, and that's tough. It's kind of it's a little bit disorganized. So it feels a little disorganized. And thank you everybody for joining. It sounds like we have some first timers here, luckily, so Tuesday we still get a little bit of that, but then Tuesday night we do have the moon in its domicile of Cancer, trining the sun. That feels nice, Tuesday and Wednesday, especially Wednesday. Wednesday's a big time because we do have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, especially with Chiron. Now, the Venus-Jupiter conjunction occurs every year. In this case, it's in Aries, so Venus and Jupiter, these are the benefics, these are the good planets, these are the planets that help you accomplish or sort of attract things into your life, right? They help you attract good luck, good fortune. They help actually kind of with Jupiter to expand your self-confidence. And what are you supposed to do with this energy? Well, because it's in Aries, my advice is to trust yourself, believe in yourself, put faith in yourself. And also with Chiron, you're turning some things that used to be vulnerabilities, you're turning those into strengths. So with Chiron and Aries, there's a feeling of the last few years of, I'm being sort of pushed aside by somebody. I'm being overlooked by somebody. My very identity is questioned by people. But now with Jupiter, Venus conjunct, it's like, I'm attracting other misfits into my circle. I'm attracting other people who maybe feel the same way. I'm sort of doing a group therapy of sorts. Or I'm meeting somebody who makes me feel, like I can be accepted, right? And I think about, what's interesting is that literally I'm kind of skipping through the days here. And as I have this chart pulled up for Wednesday night, I see the Cancer moon. Now, Wednesday night, there's that Cancer moon at 13 degrees, and 13 Cancer is around that fixed star Sirius, which actually is kind of the nature of a misfit. So I find that interesting that I kind of tapped into that. So I kind of feel like a lot of you watching this, I'm just channeling for a second and using some of my psychic skills. I just feel like a lot of people watching this are, maybe have felt like misfits in for very prolonged periods of time in their life, especially during Saturn and Aquarius, feeling very cut off from people and feeling alienated and isolated from people. So whether you chose to do that or not, right, like that's just been the prevailing culture of the last couple of years, is that it's acceptable to be alone. It's acceptable to be on your own. But at the same time, it's kind of been like, all right, well, now that I've lost some of these connections, right, I'm not on the same page with some of these people, I really want to think about, like, where do I belong? That's a huge question right now. It's like, where do you belong? And the Venus-Jupiter Chiron conjunction, I'm just kind of getting this download that it's about finding your sense of belongingness and finding it in a very serendipitous way, because Jupiter kind of just opens doors for you. Jupiter is not about effort. Saturn is the planet of like concentrating, putting effort in. You feel like you're not like getting anywhere. But Jupiter is kind of like waving a wand, and there's a little bit of magic to Jupiter, right? So it's just kind of like I'm attracting things into my life just by emanating with Aries. With Aries, just by emanating my true self, my authentic self, because Jupiter is very tied to the truth. So authenticity is your greatest asset this week. If you really lean into your authenticity, you will attract people into your life who are helping you feel feel validated in that authenticity. You're attracting people who actually, kind of make you realize that you are stronger as that misfit than you would be as this automaton or someone who's just assimilating into the culture. Because at that point, you just become a robot. And I'm going to talk about Pluto and Aquarius. Like, we have some robotics coming into the forefront anyways. We're going to have AI mimicking all kinds of human behavior and tasks and professions, and you're going to be asking yourself, like, where is the human? Where is the human left over? And so right now is actually a time to find the human through yourself, but also through other people. So this is actually a week to really reach out to people, or allow people to reach out to you, say yes to social gatherings and things like that. Because I do think Jupiter-Venus conjunct with Chiron is putting that good fortune on your side, but when you put yourself out there. So just trust your not just trust yourself, right? But like trust that you know what the best version of yourself looks like, right? You know and it sounds like, so Catherine, it sounds like you have an old friend reaching out. That's great. This is actually a good time to reach out to old friends, quote unquote. It's not a Mercury retrograde, obviously, but this is still a good time to reconnect. And then on Thursday, we have Mercury entering Pisces, which is a little bit more abstract and ephemeral than an Aquarius Mercury. And keep in mind, we have Mercury Saturn conjunct on the 1st. So I do think that there's some very long-term conversations that are happening here with Mercury and Saturn conjunct. Very serious mindsets, very serious conversations. And by Thursday, and even now, honestly, I guess even now, we have Saturn and Pluto at the anaretic degrees of their signs, of Saturn-ruled signs. So we can feel that there's kind of the end of this narrative. There's the end. We're at the end of a narrative. There is a narrative that no longer holds any weight for us. I'm going to talk about what that is in a couple of minutes. But around Wednesday, it's kind of like, again, we're not just attracting people into our lives. We're attracting people who, also no longer believe in the narrative, who also see through the forest and see through the trees, and are caught on, or they're catching on to what's really happening in society. And I was just watching another astrology forecast, and about March, and it just felt so like stodgy and sterile. It didn't feel like it had a lot of weight to it. And I think that, like, right now, like, there's so many seismic shifts it's like we have to dig into the human within us, right? Like if we approach if we approach this time period with like an overly analytical mind, like it's not going to work. And I'm seeing some of these astrologers just like really overthink some of these transits, and they're really getting into the muck with like technicalities. And I just don't think that this is the time for that, because Pluto in Aquarius is going to give us enough reason to be kind of frightened by that, to be frightened by the logical cage that we've been sort of, you know, existing in for so long. So I think that by Wednesday, we're drawing people in who are sort of like us, like-minded, and realizing, okay, I need to really reach in and go inside, go inward, and find that human element within myself, that sort of fifth element, that's that spirit. So I like what's happening Wednesday. Thursday night, there's a Cancer moon opposing Pluto, maybe a little bit of intensity there. But then by Friday, we get the Leo moon, and I think we're still basking in this Venus, Chiron, Jupiter conjunction a little bit, and that Leo moon's going to trine that conjunction. So I think Friday, maybe there is somebody who even brings out this inner joy, right? This creative joy within you, and even more confidence. But with Mercury Pisces, potential for a wandering mind, and a mind that isn't so grounded. But like I said, I think that's okay right now. I think that's totally fine. And then by Saturday, we get the Leo moon still. Again, trining all this energy. And really what we're doing here is, I want to use this as a launch pad to talk about March more broadly. So, why is March so monumental? March is monumental because we really have 3 planets shifting signs, and all 3 of the planets are very, 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 the impact will be so broad and so collective that it will be unavoidable. So these shifts are unavoidable. So I'm just going to quickly walk through the 3 like main ones. So first of all, we have Pluto entering Aquarius at the end of March. Now, Pluto stays in a sign for so long that Pluto drives all-encompassing change and transformation and reconstruction. So Pluto takes the existing materials in the world and kind of refashions them, reconstructs them, rebuilds them into something totally new. But with Pluto in Aquarius, we're going to see sort of the dark side of not only technology. Hello, Natalie. We're not just going to see the dark side of technology, but we're also going to see revelations around these very sort of, again, left-brained, logical narratives that have been pushed on us for many, many years now. So Pluto will bring about revelations, and it will basically shred the narrative that we've all sort of hooked into for a while, which I'll talk about. We also have Saturn switching into, and Melanie's asking, how long does Pluto stay in a sign? It stays in a sign for anywhere from like 13 to 20 years or so. It's a long time. It really varies because Pluto does not have an even orbit. It has a very oval shape orbit. So when it's in Scorpio, it's what's called perihelion. So it's very close. It's at its closest point to the sun. And during Pluto in Scorpio, it's not that long. I think Pluto is in Scorpio for like 12, 13 years. But if it's in the opposite sign, like Taurus, on the other side of its orbit, that's going to stay there for a while. So anyways, Pluto deals with really changes at this level of society. But Saturn is also going to enter Pisces. And Saturn in Pisces, when Saturn switches a sign, it basically shifts the focus in terms of where we're actually trying to, reap what we sow, right? And really, this is where we experience karma. Saturn is really our karma in a lot of ways. And then Mars also shifting signs from Gemini to Cancer at the very end of the month, which won't be as big of a feature because it just doesn't occupy much of March there, that transition. But, even Mars switching signs out of Gemini, it's going to get a little bit more emotions driven. It's going to be more emotional. And that's really important to keep in mind because think about what's been happening to you the last 7 months. Mars in Gemini has been basically, it's been a whiplash effect. Mars in Gemini has created a whiplash effect where it tells you to go this way and then it tells you to believe in this other narrative and then this other one. And it's keeping you kind of distracted in a lot of ways. So right now it's been very hard to pay attention, very hard to focus, very easy to, rush to another conclusion. We just have not been patient. We haven't been sitting with information at all. We've just been gliding through it. And if you look at Twitter and you look at the news, there's if you look at the news right now, like there's so much important news coming out, and thank you. It's a really important time for getting out of our dualistic distractions. So what's going to happen is like Mars in Cancer, even though Mars is debilitated there, it's not that comfortable in Cancer, but I actually think it's a relief because Mars has just been zipping us around. And so I want to just kind of focus on these three transits. So Pluto, Saturn, and Mars. And that forms really the compendium, or sort of the mosaic, I should say, of March. But quickly I want to summarize what got us here and where are we right now. So we're kind of like at the tip of a waterfall. So we're at the tip of a waterfall and it's about to kind of go like this. And we're not sure like what's down there. But like Pluto's going to show us a different realm. Pluto's going to show us a different realm. And it's going to carry us, we're going to be carried there through the watery waves of the internet. Aquarius is about the internet. So that's interesting. But where we've come from is a timeline in which time has not existed. So time as we used to know it, think about where you were 3 years ago, right? Or even more, I guess, at this point, unfortunately. So think about where you were 4 years ago. What was the pace of your life 4 years ago? Like when did you go to work? When did you go home? When did you go to bed? When did you socialize? When did you eat dinner? When did you go play sports? Like just think about any factor of your day 4 years ago. It looks different now. And, in January 2020, that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, time kind of stopped. Time really did stop. And now at this point, we're not really sure, what our frame of reference is. What is our frame of reference? And the frame of reference for many of us was the television, was, very, sort of concentrated platforms, centralized platforms. So centralization was actually kind of a theme the last couple of years. And I know that for people watching, for many of you, I would imagine all of you watching, you don't necessarily get all of your information from centralized sort of platforms. You don't necessarily get all of your information from centralized sources because you know that centralized sources have power and power creates profit motives and profit motives compromise the truth. So that's the logical train of thought. And, because of that system, the way that information has been presented to us in these through these centralized channels has actually not mirrored reality. So if you were to walk outside 3 years ago or 2 years ago or a year ago, or even now, right? Even now, if you were to walk outside a year ago, and look with your five senses, it would actually stand in direct contrast to what a mainstream media news outlet would be telling you is happening. So we created this time was basically shredded, and that created a vacuum, and our structures started to dissolve as well, or we felt that way. So we were basically looking for somebody to fill that hole. And it turned out that, mainstream media was just kind of ready to do that, a little too ready, if I'm being honest. But we all kind of hooked into that very quickly. And it was kind of scary how quickly people could latch on to a narrative of what is happening because of the confusion and the chaos that was created. So many people decided to say, I'm going to fall into this camp, or I'm going to fall into this camp. And you really only had like two options. And that created a lot of infighting, that created a lot of tension within families, within communities, within within friendships, etc. So where we've been the past 3 years is that any time, and it's very distorted. So any time that you go off of your own instincts, your own senses of what you know is happening on the ground, people will refute that and call you a monster, or people will refute that and say, well, that's not what I heard on television. And then you ask them, well, what are you seeing with your own eyes? And they will tell you, I'm seeing what the mainstream media is seeing, right? So many people have been hypnotized, and this is a mass psychosis. That is what we are living in now. And so Saturn in Aquarius has basically done this thing where it's created this architecture, this information architecture in which you can only say certain things. I, making this video right now, can only say certain things because of the centralized system that I have to buy into, right? Like I need to be part of a centralized system in order to reach all of you watching. And I'm, for the moment, willing to take that bargain because I think it's better to reach you through sort of all the hints that I'm giving, right? Because you know what I'm actually talking about, versus, you know, trying to just go into like this Dostoevskian notes from the underground and just write a bunch of shit on a journal in a journal entry. Like that's not, you know, that's not really going to cut it for me. So anyways, Saturn and Aquarius has designed these platforms, has made it so these platforms cannot enable the truth to be said. So what that has created is a suppression, obviously, but a suppression that allows this sort of the mainstream media to keep their side of the story intact. So they've been able to kind of hammer home the same messages every week, which is that, you know, you should be afraid. You should, you know, watch the Chiron every day saying breaking news, the red alarms going off, you know, and think about that. Chiron in Aries right now, and you see the Chiron on the news stations every day is bright red. It's Aries, it's breaking news. It's an adrenaline rush every day. And so my point is that Saturn has really carefully crafted this narrative that with Pluto entering Aquarius is about to break apart. So the narrative that both sides of the spectrum, both extremes, the narrative that both extremes have bought into is very fragile at this point, and it's starting to break down. And so Pluto and Aquarius, what this is going to do, and again, I'm kind of, it's kind of a shame that for whatever reason, some of the prominent astrologers just aren't talking about this, but basically what Pluto and Aquarius, what it's going to do is it's going to completely destroy the narrative that people have been holding on to for 3+ years. So that's the time frame that Saturn's been in Aquarius. It's about 3 years. And so for those 3 years, like whatever we've created, whatever we bought into for the last 3 years as part of our egoic structure for the sake of security, right? Of like, well, I belong to this camp and I believe this about what's really going on. And I believe that these people in this camp are bad, right? We all kind of buy into one of these narratives. Pluto's basically going to, in the most surprising way, just completely disassemble that. It's going to completely raise that R-A-Z-E. It's going to completely raise that foundation. And what is going to be in its wake is a lot of people who are disillusioned with Saturn and Pisces at the same time, coming in at the right time to disillusion you and take you out of the illusion. Pluto and Aquarius is going to say, this is what's really going on. And you saw that today. So if you went on Twitter today, you would see that I can't remember which agency it is. I think it's the U.S. Department of... I don't remember which department, but the U.S. department, one of the U.S. departments, one of the major departments, is now being reported by CNN, the New York Times. One of the big news stories is that the government actually now believes, one of the major agencies believes that, you know, the lab leak hypothesis is now credible. In fact, it's the most credible possibility of what was the origin of everything we've had to deal with the past few years. Whereas 2 years ago, that wasn't part of the narrative. So you're starting to see Saturn in Aquarius losing its strength, losing its structure. And I know that Saturn still has a lot of strength because it's still in its domicile. It's sometimes at the 29th degree, it kind of sort of whips its tail back and really leaves us with something. Like in Los Angeles, it left us with 30-degree weather, which is cold, right? That's perfectly Saturnian in combination with Pisces season, being wet. But anyways, Saturn is starting to lose its edge. So when Pluto comes into 0 Aquarius, it's going to be about revelation. Pluto is about revelation. So it's basically saying, okay, what you thought was a conspiracy is now a reality. And so basically, how tightly you've been holding on to the mainstream centralized narrative is going to determine how shocked you will be by March. So if you're not bought into the mainstream narrative, then March is actually going to be a time where you are validated, where your opinions are probably validated by a lot of people. Sabina's asking, what if you've isolated? I don't know what you mean by that, per se. But, Pluto and Aquarius is all about revelations again, and it's going to basically dig up all the dirt that Saturn and Aquarius is trying to pat down. It's like, oh, no, that violates our rules. We got to demonetize this video, or we got to take this down. And, like, that's worked for a long time. But now what we're seeing is that certain platforms, you know, if you think about like Twitter, it's like whatever you think about Elon Musk, right? Like he is, you know, like Elon Musk has sort of tried to, the spirit, I think, of like what he's been doing is to make Twitter a little bit more, you know, is a little bit more, you know, the end. It's like this idea of the end of fame, the end of ivory towers, the end of the blue check mark, the end of the sort of badge of expert. Like think about the blue check mark. You know, I made this prediction a while ago about how Pluto and Aquarius would be the end of fame, right? That was like my first YouTube live. And, you know, I was really onto something with, you know, even Facebook now is trialing, I think, supposedly, this way to buy blue check marks on Facebook and Instagram. And, you know, whatever you think about that model, obviously it still is really good for them to monetize, right? That's more money for them that they didn't have before. But I still think the spirit of all that is to say, look, we are going to allow this Aquarian energy to come in. We're going to level the playing field a little bit, right? And if you think about even the viewership numbers of like mainstream media, like a CNN versus a podcast, some of these major podcasts, like, you know, many of the news outlets are actually losing viewers compared to an online independent media site. So there's a lot of like sort of with Aquarius, we're seeing these independent voices come together. And so whether you see that through a blue check mark that you can now get, right? Like which is again, a form of gatekeeping, right? It's a form of gatekeeping to say, well, you deserve a blue check mark because you've been cited in the press. Okay, well, who owns that press? Only a few companies or whatnot, right? Like these are press outlets that are very corporate. So the theory is that people who have had the blue check mark for so many years now are inherently, implicitly people who buy in and support a mainstream narrative, right? If you actually like work out the logic of that, because you have to have been cited by the press and featured in the press to have a blue check mark for the most part. But now if like we take that away, if we take those keys away, now it's like, okay, well, who is credible? Who is the credible source on something? It's like we're going to see more seats at the table. We're going to see more people enter the debate. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. You know, maybe there's going to be third-party think tanks. You know, certainly people are fed up with the duality, right? So we're going to be fed up with the duality. So Pluto, so we're starting to see the story come together and culminate, right? So Pluto in Aquarius is unearthing secrets through the digital realms. It's no longer, it's like a dam that's breaking. It's a levee that's breaking. It's no longer allowing suppression of information. Pluto is even allowing us to, it's disassembling that narrative and it's establishing the true one in its place. Saturn in Pisces is coming in, meanwhile, to say, okay, well, whatever you thought was your purpose or your, I think the better way to put that is that whoever you thought was your authority figure or the person you looked up to, person you idolized, the structure that you latched onto, like that foundation is no longer there for you. So the rug is being ripped out from under people. And Saturn in Pisces will be an incredible loss of faith and a disillusionment, but a loss of faith in what? A loss of faith in centralized powers, in bureaucracy, which obviously was always untrustworthy, but it's just now we have evidence of that. We will have evidence of that. So that's what Pluto in Aquarius is going to do. It's going to bring out information via the internet that is it's going to be a major wake-up call and a revelation epiphany for people, okay? It's going to be this epiphany that, okay, this is not actually how it is. This is the matrix, right? So this is the matrix that we're waking up to. And Saturn in Pisces is going to create this land of sort of, I don't know how else to put this, but a land of sort of zombies who are very lost in sort of reaching for an answer, reaching for a replacement plan, reaching for a purpose, reaching for something to believe in, and they might not be able to find it. So, you know, you think about a show on HBO like The Last of Us, it's like maybe this is it, right? Like maybe we are The Last of Us. Like that's, you know, I've talked about that before, but it's like that's the irony of shows and entertainment like that. It's like it's kind of talking about like right now what's happening. It's like, you know, there's not many people left who are able to say, okay, I have a crystal clear sense of who I am, that I can go beyond my ego, and that there are, you know, there is an energy out there that is much greater than me, that I can tap into, but that I can use, right, for in manifesting things that are very inspiring. That's what spirituality is, in my opinion, is all about, is of course embracing the ego death and then doing something that is transcendent. Now, for people who say, I get my purpose from my company that I work for, from, the beliefs I have about material science, or the beliefs I have about the higher education system, the beliefs I have about, these major companies that are supposedly benefic and looking out for me. It's like institutional distrust is already pretty high. So I'm not going to pretend like everybody is, like just, worshiping and idolizing companies. But the irony is that like people are worshiping in a lot of ways. They are believing and buying into the narrative that is very manufactured, that is very corporate, that is very profit driven. So if we sell you fear, then you will watch, right? And what I'm selling right here and what I'm talking about is not fear. What I'm talking about is to say, keep trusting the instincts that you've already developed so strongly the past 3 years. What did you do while you were isolated? What did you do while you were alone? If you took that chance to awaken to, yes, intrinsic values. And, with Saturn, right, it's very much about extrinsic values. So we live in a very Saturnian world, and I've talked about that a couple times on other YouTube videos, but I really want to hammer home that point. So I am a contextual astrologer, which is kind of just a term that I've given for what I do, but there may be another term, but I think it's pretty spot on, which is that planets matter more or less based on what society and era that you live in. So Saturn is very overplayed in modern society since the industrial age. We have been overplaying Saturn. Versus an agrarian society many thousands of years ago, Saturn does not really. Saturn means something, obviously, but it's not quite as prominently featured. So we have like waves. We have planetary ages, right? We have planetary ages, and that's a theory that I'm still fleshing out because I don't. I feel like generally speaking, we're in some type of Saturnian age. I know that we're in the age of Pisces technically. That's the precession of the equinox. That's the age we're in. But I still think that Saturn is really dominant right now. Like Saturn in your birth chart is very overdeveloped. So we are conditioned basically. So we are conditioned from an early age to not believe our instincts, to not trust our instincts, to believe that if we connect with spirits that we are crazy, to believe that if we notice patterns between things, between the micro and the macro, that we are basically just making things up, that if we relive our birth, that's impossible. I told somebody that once, I was at a wedding, and I told somebody that I re-experienced my birth. I told somebody, I was like, I was meditating and I relived my birth and I saw it happen. And the look of disgust that they gave me was undeniable, right? Like they just looked at me like, that there's something wrong with me, right? Like that's limited thinking, right? So we live in a world where it's like, these are the boundaries and there's nothing outside of that because my conditioning has told me that if I stay inside this box, that I will have ultimate control over my life. So I can control where I go, what I choose to do with my life. I can control how much money I end up making and all these things, but that's an illusion, right? So it's like, you're actually being controlled. That's the irony. So most people are being controlled. Most people are being controlled and not actually controlling themselves, right? So by experience, so anyways, my point is that, we live in this construct that's very extrinsic. It's very extrinsic and it's driven by self-consciousness. So it's driven by this idea of parents and then eventually teachers and then eventually coaches and then eventually bosses at work telling you, hey, I need you to behave this way. I need you to do this. And if you don't do this, by the way, you're going to be ostracized from the company, from the family, from the friend group, from the sports team, like whatever it is. Like there's the constant threat of you being ostracized and exiled. And I'm guaranteeing you, everybody watching this video has been through a time period of exile, whether it was in high school, with your friend group, whether it was in a relationship, whether it was within your family. You probably faced a period of feeling like a misfit, of feeling like, there was a downside to not getting along. There was a downside to not taking the programming. And all of us have bought into that to some extent, right? Like we've all had times where we've had to sacrifice. We've had to sacrifice our authenticity, our honesty, and our truth to get to the next level in that eye of society, right? So in the eyes of society, which is really just the eye. You know, I think about Sauron from Lord of the Rings. Sauron is Saturn. Sauron is that eye in the sky, always watching you, always surveying you. And there's this idea, this implication that if you deviate from that, the wishes of that eye, that it will identify you and it will exile you. So that's the Saturnian world that we live in. And so most people are terrified. I know people like this who have a certain career that they hate, that they're miserable in. And if you actually try to, decipher why they're doing it, they'll tell you, I really don't want to disappoint mom and dad. I really don't want to disappoint them. Or, my wife has a certain idea of me, or my friends have a certain idea of me. What would happen to my friends? What would my friends do if I decided to tell them, look, I'm actually this type of person. I actually would rather be doing this, or I'd rather be living here. Most people are actually terrified of that. But that is not the innate. That is not the innate sort of nature of a human being. A human being naturally, without any conditioning, would have no problem sort of going after what it wants, with connecting with nature and understanding what the world is actually all about. But we've really been deprived of our understanding, right? So we've been deprived of our understanding, and then it's been refilled with something that is very cheapened. It's very cheapened. So basically there's this concept that there's this implication that you don't have the answers, that you don't have any of the answers, that you are completely helpless on your own. That's the prevailing wisdom right now, but it's not true, because I shouldn't even be laughing. But what's going to happen when Saturn's in Pisces is that, again, those crutches that people are leaning on, those are going to go away for them, and then they're really going to be lost. So they're going to say, oh, well, that eye in the sky that I was secretly abiding by this whole time, my whole life, is now going to be revealed to be corrupt, is now going to be revealed to be completely against you, working against you to disempower you. And again, what's so weird about our world right now is we're kind of in this inverted reality where if you read a survey about trust in institutions, the trust that people hold on institutions is at an all-time low. Back when I was working in market research, we would always look through those surveys, and it was pretty stark. People do not, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, people do not trust institutions. But for some reason, even though those people do not trust institutions, they still accept the narrative of what they watch on television. They still accept the narrative of what they're shown on the internet. And they believe that it's not curated. They believe that in some way, it's actually just the truth and nothing but the truth. But obviously, it's all driven by profit, and it's all driven by what drives engagement. If I wanted to drive engagement on this video right now, and I wanted to, keep people looking, I could probably say something just completely outrageous, or I could act like a fool. I could act like an animal. And maybe some people would start watching. Maybe some people who don't care about astrology would buy, all of a sudden start watching my videos. But I'm not here to do that. I'm here to just talk about things in a way that just rips the mask off, right? So why are people not trusting institutions, but believing, purely in the science of things, or purely in the material reality of things, which is bought and paid for by corporations? So it's you're still working hand in glove with the corporatocracy when you say that it's just about science, or it's just about analytics, and it's just about data. Why would that contrast exist? It's because we're in the age of deception. We are in the age of Pisces. And that's really the sort of the crux of all of this, is that, media is our weakness as human beings, because it really, it's kind of, it's fed to us through such an entertaining medium. It's fed to us through such a natural, light. Think about the television. Think about your smartphone. It's just lit up. And when we see the light, we're kind of attracted to that because we think that this is the truth, that this is going to give us something. And maybe for some people, it's just about escapism. But it just astonishes me how many rational, quote-unquote, people believe in the mainstream narrative about what's been going on the past 3 years. And they just take it at face value. right? They literally take it at face value, and they believed everything that was being exaggerated in the media, right? So yes, and it's like Plato's cave. So we think about, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. The shadows on the wall. So yeah, we see the shadows on the wall, but we don't really see the people behind. We don't see the people behind it. There was a survey done about like sort of the whole last couple of years about like what is your risk, how likely are you to be hospitalized by this, and like people overestimated the risk by like 20x or even more than I think it was like by 50 times what the actual risk was. And I've given this analogy before, but it's kind of like it's kind of like the stoplight is red, and they're telling you not to go across the street, and it stays red for hours and hours, and most people refused. Most people refuse to move. They just stay there because it's like, well, the light's red, so I need to do what the light tells me to do. Like that's the world we live in right now. Somebody could be 1,000 miles away and just press a button, and the stoplight goes red. And no matter what's happening around you, if there's no cross traffic, you like most people would just spend hours at this point just staying. They would just stay where they are. They'd stay in place. They'd stay locked down. So like that's the weird kind of twisted world we live in, which is kind of saying, okay, but it's like, how did we get there, right? It's because we've been deprived of all the tools that we already have inside of ourselves. We have already lost our power within our chakra system, within our instincts. It's been externalized and sold to us through culture. So it's like if you want to feed your heart chakra, you'll watch a Disney movie, and like that's it. If you want to feed your solar plexus and feel confident, it's like, I don't know, what are you going to do? Watch fucking, some kind of, I don't know, motivational speaking show. Like, it's like really weird, right? Like we live in this really weird time where it's like we just literally think that we are nothing. We think that we have no value without the external products that are being sold to us in the media. So I think that that's kind of what happened. It's like people are generally speaking like rational. People are generally speaking, I do think like a lot of people are like, fairly rational, and they like kind of get that institutions are corrupt. Like I'm not pretending like, there's only 100 people out there who, yes, we've outsourced autonomy. That's a great way to put it, Brienne. But I'm under no illusion. And I do think that there's some spiritual people who are like a little too far on this idea, like far into this other realm of like, well, there's only 100 people who are awake and like everybody else is fucked. Like, I'm not saying that either. I'm thinking that there's kind of this, again, this conundrum we're in, this contradiction where people who are rational, who don't trust into institutions, are just their resolve is so weakened that they just have to buy whatever is sold to them at this point because they don't have a direction. Right? Like most people are lost. And so when Saturn goes into Pisces, getting back to that transit, when Saturn goes into Pisces, people who are lost now are going to be even more lost. So everything is going to go further, sort of into a mode of, I would argue, a depression. And so people talk about the Great Depression and economic depression. I think there may be just a literal depression. I think there may be a literal depression actually kind of sweeping through the world in a way that we haven't seen ever, in a way that we still can't even conceive of. So we think about how traumatized people were by the lockdown. We think about how traumatized people were by the lockdown, but that was sort of a forced, a forced trauma in some ways, right? Because if you watch the news, if you were to just pretend like, it's a Clockwork Orange, you just like someone's like taping your eyes open and you're watching CNN every day. Imagine if you had to watch CNN every day for 2 hours a day. Just imagine if someone said, you got to do that for 2 hours a day throughout the lockdown. Like, what would happen to you? What would happen to you psychologically, right? You would be traumatized. Even if you never had to go outside, and even if you lived in a remote area where when you went outside, everything was fine, that media experience would be traumatizing for you. And that media experience would leave you thinking that you were 50 times more likely to go to the hospital, despite the fact that it was more like, not even 1%. So like think about the distortion that's been created, and think about the trauma that people have inherited, not just from sickness, right? Not just from sickness, but the sickness of fear. Fear itself is a pandemic. So when you think about it, like that, it kind of feels like people have been thrown into this cage. they've been thrown into this constant survival mode. And a lot of people still watch that stuff. A lot of people still watch, it's basically drivel, right? Like it's essentially drivel. And there's this idea that if I'm not clued into that, if I'm not getting that information, then I'm less likely to survive, right? So, people are in a survivalist state. And so Saturn in Pisces is going to throw people into even more of a survivalist state, because it's going to say, okay, well, those people who were selling you on fear, they weren't so trustworthy, actually. They were shown to be contradicting themselves, and they were showing to steer the narrative towards a certain agenda that would feed a certain agenda that would benefit a certain conglomerate. And I think we all know who those conglomerates are. There's only like 3 of them, 4 of them. But just as the right uses, the military industrial complex to prop up this concept of like war, obviously the right is very, very culpable for the WMD stuff in the early 2000s. We know that they were selling fear to get the whole Iraq war started. The left has now bought into the medical industrial complex and worked hand in glove with them. So both sides profiteer. So we have war profiteering, we have medical profiteering. So these are the 2 foundations. These are the 2 engines and the machines that are being fed by either side. So both sides have their revolving doors of lobbyists and people who basically say like, you need to make decisions that are gonna benefit us. And the left, for whatever reason, decided to sell themselves to the medical industrial complex. And I actually did not really see that one coming. That was a little surprising. But at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, this is all feeding into the same archetype, though, which is that no matter what side you're on, there is a complex, there's a massive industry out there that you are beholden to and that you will make decisions on behalf of. So when I see a politician say, we need to do more of this, I always think about what company is behind them. So again, Plato's cave, what company is behind them benefiting from that? And so I'm politically completely, unaffiliated. I'm not affiliated with either side. So, and and this is interesting, right? So there's been people who have been like extremely, they've always told me, oh, your content resonates, your message resonates. And I've been speaking about this stuff for like years now, but I've mostly just been speaking about it in code because Saturn in Aquarius has limited what I can say over the internet. But, if you look at my YouTube videos from like a year and a half ago when I started my channel, like my videos have all said the same thing. My Instagram stories will oftentimes say the same thing, but I speak in code because I'm trying to reach people, as many people as possible, without being penalized. And I'm trying to basically say, like, this is the message. This has been the message all along. But, it hasn't been lost on me that when I become more honest about what's really happening, I've lost people. I've had people message me on Instagram saying, I can't believe that, you would align yourself with this person, or I can't believe you would sympathize with this. And they would unfollow me, block me from every channel, couldn't reach them ever again. And it's like, these are people who have benefited from my videos, my readings, and all these things, right? And it's like, that's pretty whack, right? So we live in this world that's so tribal and so distorted that it's like, if you're not gonna side with the company, the media company, that's helping me survive every day, then I think you're a bad person. That's what they're really saying, right? Like, isn't that's like really weird. That's like really weird and desperate. They're saying that, like, even though I trust your message, even though your message empowers me, even though your message is resonating with me, because you're not it's a Pavlovian effect. So even though it's like you're going against the person who's putting food in my bowl every single day, right? And you're not feeding that. You're not feeding that survival mechanism, Evan. You're actually compromising my survival mechanism. So what you have to do is, someone watching this video, obviously you're awake, obviously you're clued into all this. What you're going to watch in March is people, their eyes sort of starting to finally be unpeeled a little bit. The veil will start to be lifted, because centralized messaging systems that they have relied on are finally going to have to start, by necessity, talking about very like a little bit more about the truth of what's been going on. And you're going to watch people start to lose their sense of self. They're going to lose their sense of reality because they don't have a sense of self at this point. Because for most people, their sense of self is literally just a proxy for the media channel that they watch or for the political group that they ascribe to. And that's really sad. Most people have been literally gutted out. And so when you watch a show like The Last of Us, like that show is not, in my opinion, like it's obviously it's a work of fiction in a literal sense, but symbolically it's spot on. It's like we're already kind of there. And I don't know if, and I think people have lost a part of their souls. And shamans, they're not going to help. They're not going to be able to help everybody retrieve their soul. That's an individual process. That takes time. That takes effort. That takes responsibility. That takes work. And so you're going to watch people sort of get into the state of realizing they're kind of going to become self-aware zombies, where they're kind of be like, I've been kind of a zombie, I guess, for a while, but I'm now self-loathing as well. I'm a little self-loathing, I'm a little nihilistic, and I'm a little aimless. So Saturn in Pisces is going to make people that way. It's going to make people very self-loathing. And self-loathing is probably one of the worst, one of the lowest vibrations you can have. Because if you reject the self, you reject spirit. I mean, that's kind of the idea there. So people are going to be rejecting themselves, rejecting spirit, and asking for a solution that is not really there. Because they're going to need a quick solution. They're going to say, well, what's the next drug that you have for me? And if it's not there, they're shit out of luck, basically. So that's my really honest take about March. But, Mars Gemini, that's the last thing I was going to say. Mars Gemini has been feeding this dualistic narrative of like, could it be this? Could it be that? Could it be this? And now you're starting to see that narrative break down. So again, like we all know that where it really originated. We know that a laboratory makes a lot more sense. We know that that's never been out of the picture, and yet it's been deemed a conspiracy for a long time, and now it's not. And now it's becoming the mainstream narrative. And it's like, what reality are people going to be able to hook into at that point? So, so I do think March is very revelatory. I do think March is very much a disturbance. March is a disturbing time for people who, again, have lost themselves. March is probably more of a vindication for people who have stayed true to themselves the whole time. I think it's going to be very validating. Because I was at lunch with somebody today, and we're kind of talking about that, like that we feel like the narrative is finally caving a little bit. So people who thought that the product worked, they're realizing that it didn't work. People who even invested in the product are saying that it didn't work. So, there's a lot of revelations that are coming. And yeah, what can you do to really empower yourself is to continue to go on your own ascension journey. So to recognize that books don't have the answers for you, that words not going to answer it for you. You have to go inside, inward, and experience the sort of the divine, and I know that sounds generic, but it's not untrue. It's like you think you've experienced it, but you can go further with it. We're also going to see a revolution in psychedelics and how people treat their mental health. So Saturn in Pisces is going to further the mental health crisis, which is sad, but it's kind of self-created. Again, I only can feel so bad for people when they've decided to hook into such a disastrous narrative. So people are going to have that kind of wake-up call, and it is going to worsen mental health. But Pluto in Aquarius actually will, I think, empower the psychedelics industry. So the idea of like psilocybin, other compounds, other natural remedies are going to make a huge comeback. So in the 1960s, of course, there was a lot of progress done, made on psychedelics, and then it was by Nixon. Richard Nixon basically classified psychedelics as a dangerous substance. And so it fell apart, again, because the narrative was tweaked intentionally and manufactured on through the scientific community. The scientific community basically, it has a political agenda, right? So the scientific community decided to say, psychedelics are not an answer. Psychedelics could lead to XYZ. Psychedelics have all these dangerous effects, and they ripped it out of the system, and they marginalized it. Well, guess what? Now it's coming back, and it's not coming back because we didn't have the tools to validate it, right? Again, it's because the scientific community made a decision to work hand in glove with the Nixon administration to basically, and then eventually, you know, in the 80s even, you know, the Reagan administration, to really, you know, create this war on drugs. And it's like, we're starting to reap what we sowed. We thought that, you know, these other types of solutions from the medical community would work. It's like they're not working. They're not working because those are being hijacked by political, you know, stakeholders. You think about, you know, painkillers and stuff like that. I mean, we already know that all those companies have been sued, and it's a total scandal. It's a total sham. So, I feel like it's like it was like there was a break in the progress. Like we really, and this is interesting too. I'll kind of end with this. You know, in the early 60s, we really did have a window into a better society. You know, we did have this revolution in psychedelics. We did have a president like John F. Kennedy who, you know, was actually quite inspiring. And he, you know, he believed that there is power in the democratic collective, in actual democracy. Well, guess what happened? That whole reality got snuffed out. That whole reality changed. And you know, the sort of the hard hats won. You know, the sort of the military industrial complex took over, and we're living in that. We're starting to disassemble. We're starting to disassemble that though, and there's a beeline. There's a direct line and correlation between that time period of shutting down alternative therapies and shutting down more spiritual revelations, with both sides, right and left, right now, trying to keep you in a structured reality that's so stale and so overbaked and so stagnant, it has no purpose anymore. You can no longer benefit from the system. Like, you literally will not benefit from the system. You know, like, think about how expensive it is to even, like, go and see a medical professional now. Think about how expensive it is. And when you see them, they talk to you for 5 minutes and they're like, get the fuck out of here. You know, like, that's the world we live in. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. It's pretty decrepit, actually. And yeah, I have no shame in saying that. Like, I don't care, like, where you work. I'm sure there's, like, a medical professional who could come on right now and, you know, do a little debate with me and say, well, you have no idea how many years of training I had. You have no idea how many hours I've worked. Like, fair. Fair enough. And I respect that. I respect people who work hard. But I also think that too many people have just gotten in line and just tried to maintain a system that is completely broken. And, like, why not use your talents to lift up the collective through alternative pathways? And that's what Pluto and Aquarius is going to do. That's what Pluto and Aquarius is going to do. And Saturn and Pisces, by the way, you're going to see a lot of exits from the medical community. A lot of people disillusioned by that. A lot of medical practitioners who used to say, hey, if you have a problem, I'm just going to give you something for it, and you're not going to worry about preventing it. Like, that's going to go away. I do think that we're going to start to have a more honest assessment of, like, how do we prevent problems, not just treat them with things that are addictive. So, you know, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. It just kind of angers me how far off the path we are and how aligned we could have been. Right? If we had just taken the 60s differently, if we treated the 1960s differently, I really think that we could be decades beyond where we are now in terms of well-being and life expectancy. But unfortunately, we've decided mass production, centralization is the name of the game. But I'm not saying that March is going to take that away completely, right? Like, I'm under no illusions that anything changes at the drop of a hat, because Pluto is glacial. Pluto takes time. Pluto moves very slowly, right? But I do think Pluto in Aquarius is similar to a Pluto-Uranus conjunction. And what was happening during a Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo, that was the 1960s. That was the mid-60s. And during the mid-60s, we did make a lot of progress towards a more equal society. We had the Civil Rights Bill. We had this push for progress. And so, like, we need to focus on that type of progress, like social progress, the recognition of equality, the recognition that everybody has a voice, the recognition that the ivory tower does not have our best interest in mind. And so again, this is really the damage you're doing if you buy into the mainstream narrative, is actually you're keeping the powerful people in power. You're allowing them to stay in control because they have all these tools through the media to basically keep people asleep. So as long as you use this March timeframe to recognize where the narrative is changing, recognize where the other people around you are starting to wake up a little bit, be that guide. Be that shaman. If you really want to be that shaman, like help wake other people up. I'm trying to do this in my own life. Like I'll send someone an article and say, "Hey, did you know that this sort of hypothesis is now accepted?" Like that's my way of saying like maybe you should kind of start to think differently about this. So overall, just get ready for March. Be patient with people. Don't let Mars Gemini, make you too argumentative there. I think we already have enough polarization in our society. But really just try to lift people up to, to their higher self, really. Because, make people aware of like how disconnected they are from their essence. And whenever somebody says, I can't do this, I can't work here, I can't do this job, I can't have this career, this is out of my league, like tell them that they're wrong. Tell them that they can believe in themselves and they don't need to be self-conscious anymore. They don't need to wait around for what is accepted. And I always tell this story, but I think it's just really empowering. It's like, I was working in such a corporate world for 7 years and like, in New York City, and I always tried to adhere to the customs and the norms and assimilate. I assimilated basically, and it was so liberating for me to just go on LinkedIn a year ago and say, look, I'm a full-time astrologer now, not hiding anything. In my network on LinkedIn has no interest in that field. Like, most of the people who saw that post were probably like appalled, disgusted, and, either unfollowed me or wanted nothing to do with me. They would never probably want to talk to me again. Knowing that I became an astrologer, believing that that's not a legitimate career. But, I recognize what needs to change in the collective. I know that energy work is so undervalued right now, and we need more of it. We need everybody watching this video. We need to go out there and believe in our instincts, believe in our skills, and provide that in an Aquarian way, like to be the water bearer, to spread those gifts to other people, and sort of ignite this collective awakening. So I appreciate your time tonight, and if you ever want a reading from me, you can get one through my website. So I'll add the links down below after this, but if you just search my name on Google, you'll find it. I'm also hosting a retreat in Croatia in September. So if you want to spend a week with me and get some custom astrology insights, definitely do that. And I'm actually just launched a course today. I'm hosting a course March 14th about relationships. So I'm going to look into the astrology of relationships. So I know that's been a request for a long time. Why do relationships fail? Why did this succeed? And I believe that the magic of relationships is very important to preserve, right? And we don't want to walk away from organically good relationships. But astrology is a really good sort of refinement tool to realizing where can I make this relationship better? And if it's not going well, where can I look in the chart for placements that I can kind of work differently with and mitigate? Yes, and it's not something to overlook, because I'll give you the tools to kind of realize, okay, I can better assess like how I bring my skill sets to any relationship, by the way, romantic or platonic, it doesn't matter. How do I bring my authentic self to relationships, but also like where are my Achilles heels? Like where do I have some biases? Like do I have a biasness towards maybe being a little flighty in relationships, or do I feel like I'm a little austere actually? Like there's many different layers to it. So I do hope you enroll. And if you can't attend the lecture live, you still get the recording. So this is going to happen March 14th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. It's a 2-hour lecture approximately. It's so powerful. Speaking of, this whole age of Pisces thing we're in, people lack such an awareness. They lack so much self-awareness that I do think astrology helps you gain more control, right? By knowing who you are, even better than how you intuitively know you are. The chart reflects that back at you and says, you thought from a subjective standpoint you knew who you were, but the chart is going to show you, this is why you're getting held up in things. So it's very powerful, and I hope you take the course. It would mean a lot. So, that's also linked in all my bios. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you for, I'm sure there's a couple people who watch this video who are going to unfollow me right after they watch it. And if you unfollow me, that's fine. I don't, if you're not on the same spiritual quest as me, that's your prerogative. So for the people who decide to stick with me after everything I've said tonight, and I'm sure there's people watching this who are like, Evan, like, why do you need to qualify this? Like, you didn't say anything wrong. But you just really want to realize that we live in a world of such sensitivity that in such divorceness, we are so divorced from the truth of ourselves, of who we are, but also of the reality around us, that even speaking a modicum of the truth is upsetting to people, is very upsetting to them. And I'm telling you, I've had people cut me out of their lives for things as mundane as what I've said tonight. But if you're still here and you feel like following me after this, then more power to you. I think you're on the right track, in my opinion. But we're also unique individuals too, and we're gonna get back to that ocean from our own river. But that ocean, to get to that ocean, right, you need to understand yourself, and you need to go beyond the duality, right, of where we are. So I appreciate your time as always, and we will see you next time on the YouTube.